Out of all of the 50 or so plants that I grew in my very first gardening season, only one of them died on me, and all of the rest of them gave me substantial harvests, including an almost 50-pound watermelon. So take it from my personal experience that these steps do indeed matter. Hello everyone, this is Jordan here with Girl Plus Garden, and welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, I'm so glad you are here and I hope you will stay for a while. So today I am going to be giving you guys my top 5 steps on becoming a pro level gardener the first time around. This will essentially be an overview of steps you should definitely consider taking before you begin installing your very own garden. One thing I definitely made it a point to do before I began my gardening journey was to do lots of research, and I used YouTube University right here to help me find the information I was looking for and to help me gather and analyze that information and data to determine what were most likely going to be the best steps for me, or at least what steps I was most interested in taking and beginning my own personal gardening journey. So that is essentially what I'll be sharing with you here today, what I found most helpful in considering before you begin your own personal journey. I would like to add also that I pretty much have these listed in the order that you're going to want to do them. So keep that in mind as you're watching and if you're taking notes as well. So one of the first things you're going to want to get familiar with, or at the very least find out, is knowing your own growing zone. So the continental US is divided up into different growing zones. My garden is located right on the cusp between growing zone 7B and 8A. And what these growing zones can tell you are a few different things, but mostly what it's giving, the information that it's giving you is going to be related to your climate. So first frost dates, last frost dates are going to be important. Because these are going to be determining factors in knowing what to plant and when to plant them. So if you've seen any of my other videos, then you know that there is such a thing as cold weather crops and warm season crops. Cold weather crops are going to be crops that are more frost tolerant. So if your temperatures drop below freezing or 32 degrees Fahrenheit, they're going to still be okay. A lot of plants like brassicas can usually drop or withstand temperatures between anywhere from 15 to 25 degrees Fahrenheit. So that's what your growing zone really is going to tell you, is basically how long of a warm season you're going to have, and also potentially even how long of a cold season you will have. For me, in zone 7B/8A, my first frost date is typically around November 15th with a few days, give or take, and my last frost date is typically around April 15th, again, with a few days, give or take. So knowing your zone is going to help you know what your seasons look like as far as warm versus cold, and how many days you're going to have to be able to grow and harvest those crops within those specific seasons. Another thing that knowing your zone is going to be able to help you determine is what crops or plants are annual to your specific growing zone and what are or could possibly be perennials. So annual crops are crops that you will grow each year, or at least you will plant them for a season and they will die back typically once the temperatures drop too low for that specific plant, and you will have to grow and replant a completely new plant in the following year. Perennials, on the other hand, are plants that you can grow or plant once and they will generally come back year after year. Keep that in mind and use that information to determine what can I grow here, or put here that will come back for me every year? What can I grow here that I'm going to have to replant every year? You can also use this information to help you kind of determine what your garden plan is and whether you want to add in more crops that you maybe don't have to plant every single year. So once you've determined your growing or gardening zone, the next thing you're going to want to do is observe your potential growing space. Whether you have acres upon acres of land, or all you have is a deck or a patio, or potentially even an apartment balcony, you want to observe what your growing space looks like throughout the day as far as sunny spots versus shady spots. I know that for me, where my growing area is set up in our backyard, in the summer season, the warm season specifically, that area is pretty much completely full sun. Now, for my particular zone, being full sun doesn't quite look the same here as it does maybe in Arizona or Texas or California. Most of the plants that I grow in the summer season and the warm season can tolerate the full sun that we have here because there's not really a lot of plants that shade my gardening area in the summer specifically. Now, if I were somewhere like Texas or Arizona, I might want to take into consideration that I might need to either add in some shade cloth or use a space in my yard area or the potential growing spaces where there might be a spot or two that can provide some shade throughout those long summer days specifically. So you want to observe your potential growing space to determine also where you want your growing spaces to be, or what would be the best potential growing space for your garden, and also what that's gonna look like. Ideally, if you can observe that space at different times of the day as well, that will also help you know not only what that looks like overall, but also what it looks like in the early morning. So say 8 a.m., what that looks like midday. What does that look like in the afternoon, 4 p.m. and beyond, to determine if that looks different at different points and times in the day. When thinking about starting your own garden, I urge you to consider your own personal time and labor capacity for tending to the garden. Now, obviously, you can adjust your growing space depending on how much is available to you in your own particular dwelling area or wherever you're going to be putting your gardening space. But you can allot a specific amount of space to the garden to kind of either limit your growing space so that you maybe don't overwhelm yourself, or to allow for potential growth and expansion as you continue through your gardening journey. It can be very overwhelming if you do not kind of limit yourself, or if you're unsure of what that experience is going to be like for you. It can get a bit overwhelming if you bite off more than you can chew. So I know me, when I first started, I did not have a full-time job. So I was able to kind of tend to the garden as I saw fit or as necessary throughout the day. Especially when we're talking about the summer garden, because that really is probably the most overwhelming of all the seasons, just because you have more daylight hours. You typically tend to have more water and rain during the warmer seasons. So all those conditions kind of add to the ability, obviously, not only for your plants that you've intentionally planted into your growing space to grow, but also for things like weeds and other invasive or aggressive plants that you maybe don't necessarily want in your growing space, but are already there, or at least around your general growing area. So the summer garden in particular can be very overwhelming. And I know that once I went back into the workforce, I really did not have the time to tend to the summer garden especially, and weed it and cut it back and harvest when I needed to and water when I needed to. And all of this is part of the reason why I took a little bit of a break from the garden, just because when I started, I enjoyed it so much that I expanded it, but I didn't take into consideration how that expansion would fare if I stepped back into the workforce, or if I had to spend my time doing other things outside of being home and being able to tend to the garden on a regular and consistent basis. So take that into consideration, because it is going to be very crucial to your own personal gardening experience. I know me personally, I want everybody to enjoy their growing experiences. And I also want you all to set yourselves up for the highest level of success in your journey. So just remember to kind of have a little bit of restraint if you are super excited about starting the garden and starting your growing journey. Have a little bit of restraint, and maybe you limit yourself to maybe only a portion of the space you might have available, so that you don't get so overwhelmed that it's not enjoyable for you at any point. My next tip is going to be to create a garden plan. Now, once you've kind of determined what your space is, or at least what you're going to allot for your growing space, you're kind of able to use that to create at least a rough plan. Now, it doesn't have to be anything super intricate and detailed, but to have a general idea of what your growing space is going to look like and potentially how you want to set it up is always a go, in my personal opinion. In my garden, my growing beds are 4 feet wide by 4 feet wide by 12 feet long. Now, this is different from most other gardeners. Usually your typical garden bed or raised bed growing dimensions are going to be 4 feet by 8 feet. I chose 4 by 12 just because of the space I have allotted to my garden, and the way also that I kind of want to have it set up. So use this sort of creating a plan time to not only determine how you want your layout to be, but especially if you're doing something like raised beds, how you want those raised beds to be. How high do you want those raised beds to be? How long and wide do you want those raised beds to be? Generally, 4 feet is probably as wide as you're going to want to go in most cases, simply because usually from one side of the bed, you can reach into the garden bed, a 4 foot wide garden bed, about halfway. And then if you go around to the other side, you can do the same. So you can reach all the way into that bed from each side, all the way in if you need to, for things like weeding and pruning and harvesting. Length, you can kind of go for as much as you desire. If you want to do 32 foot long beds, go for it. If you want to do only 4 foot by 4 foot beds, go for it. Do what you think is going to be best for your own particular space, for your own particular capacity, and for the resources you have available to you. Obviously, raised beds is not the only option for your garden. If you want to do an in-ground growing space for your entire space, or even just for a portion of it, take that into consideration and put that or make that part of your plan. So that way you have an idea of what materials you're going to need in order to either build up your space or prep your space for the coming growing seasons. Once you have an idea of what your plan is or what your layout is going to look like, you can also use that as a way to determine what you're going to be planting and kind of allot the different spaces for those different crops. This is where research on your particular plants that you plan on planting comes into play, and knowing the amount of space those plants need, and how much space you want to allot for those different types of crops. Though it's somewhat important, knowing plant spacing and all those things is not the most important thing when you're planning out, what your space is going to look like and where your plants are going to go. And the reason being is because it almost doesn't matter when you have rich soil. So if your soil is very well taken care of, if it is very nutrient dense, if you amend it and add to it as necessary and consistently, typically your spacing isn't going to matter so much. Now, I'm not saying that it's absolutely of no importance, but it's not going to be as important to know the exact spacing and have the exact spacing for every single plant that you have in every space or area within your garden. The last step for the things you want to do before growing or starting your own growing and gardening space is going to be to begin in the fall and the winter time. Now, this is mainly just my personal opinion. I know that I share these sentiments with most likely several other gardeners around, but the fall and the winter time, as far as planning and researching and building goes, is going to be your best time to do so. Use that time to gather your information, collect your data, collect your materials. If you're going to be building raised beds, get your materials for your raised beds and begin building those raised beds. If you're doing in-ground gardening, use that time to prep your space. Fall and winter for doing any sort of prep is probably the best time, because if you're adding compost, whether that be to a raised bed or an in-ground growing space, that is going to give you the time you need to allow that compost to sit and break down a bit further over time, over the next few months, likely until you're ready to actually put plants into those growing spaces, so that those nutrients from that compost can break down and disperse into your growing space further, giving your plants, once you are actually ready to plant them, the best chance for growth and survival and thrival, hopefully. So starting in the fall and winter is going to be ideal also, especially if you're setting up any sort of indoor growing station. That will give you time to get the materials you need to set up your station, and also allow you to kind of spread out the time it takes for you to gather all of those materials. If I'm comparing it to starting, say you're going to start some warm season crops, and maybe you begin in the March, April time, the time frame you have to kind of gather all of those materials and get everything you need to get your plants started so they'll be ready to go outside come time for them to be transplanted outside is going to be much shorter than if you start, say, in October or November the year prior. You'll have much more time to collect the materials, to build them and put them together, and also to plant and take care of the seeds and the plants that you plan on growing for the late spring, early summer season. If you want to do something like build a greenhouse in your growing space or near your growing space, doing so in the fall and the winter will also give you a better opportunity to obviously get that structure up and ready to go, but also hopefully give you time to kind of see what that space looks like. When it has a certain amount of sunlight hours beating down on it, what do my temperatures look like during the day? What do my temperatures look like at night? Will I need to add any sort of supplemental heat if maybe my temperatures dip below a certain point, especially at night? All of those factors are going to be so important to giving yourself time to determine what maybe needs to be added, or what additional needs to be done to build the most optimized space for your particular circumstances. A bonus tip for anyone doing any sort of in-ground growing, obviously if you have the time and the financial capacity, is to do a soil test. Now they do have at-home soil test kits that you can use, but this is going to be important so that you kind of have an idea of what your nutrient levels look like in your soil, and can also amend the soil as necessary to create the most optimal growing space. You can also do this with any sort of raised beds that you maybe kind of constructed and built your own growing medium, or a combination of things for your growing medium. You can still do that for your raised beds, but it's going to be especially important in your in-ground spaces because you're kind of using what's already there. So the best way to know what's there and to add what might be needed is going to be to do a soil test to determine what that looks like in your particular area. And on the note of soil and what it looks like for your particular growing area, it's always a great idea to do research on what that looks like for the area that you're in. Even though I'm in zone 7B, over here on the East Coast, what our soil looks like is going to be completely different from what the soil looks like, say, in Arkansas, or in a state that maybe is on the completely other side of the country. Our soil composition is going to look a lot different. I know for us over here, it tends to vary between clay-like soil, and sometimes we can have soil that's a bit more loamy and sandy. Those different soils are going to need different amendments to make them more optimized for your veggie plant growth especially. So do research on what your soil looks like on your particular area, even if that simply means going out into your growing space or area and digging up the soil and seeing what it looks like, and comparing that to research on the internet, on YouTube, and saying, what should I do for my red clay soil? What should I do for my sandy soil? Take the time to collect the data that you need to, again, just give yourself the best chance at success, especially if this is your first time. Last but not least, I want to encourage any of you who may be beginning for the first time, especially your own growing and gardening journey, to be inspired and go forward with confidence. Obviously, doing research and watching all the videos and collecting all the data possible is going to help, especially with the confidence portion of this. But know that even if you don't necessarily feel like you have enough experience, that you do absolutely have tons of resources at your disposal to help you on your journey. Growing food has been something that has been obviously happening since the dawn of time, or at least since humans have been around. So know that there are people and places and things around you that can assist with you troubleshooting on your own personal journey, and also inspiring you in the particular methods and practices that you may want to use as you continue to go forward. I hope the information I provided for you all here today was super helpful, especially for my beginners and those of you who are looking for knowledge and inspiration and getting ready to begin your own gardening journey. As always, if you have any questions, any comments, be sure to leave them for me in the comment section below, and I look forward to seeing all of you in the next video.